Millionaire sees young woman crying at his son's grave, and what she holds leaves him shocked. Richard Henderson never imagined that a routine visit to the cemetery would completely change the course of his life. The 62-year-old businessman had developed the habit of going there every Friday, always at the same time, always alone. It was on one of those rainy afternoons that he spotted an unknown young woman kneeling before the grave of his son, Christopher. She was crying so intensely that her sobs echoed among the headstones, and in her trembling hands was a still-sealed university diploma. "Miss, are you all right?" asked Richard, approaching cautiously. The young woman raised her red, swollen eyes, seeming not to recognize where she was for a moment. The diploma slipped from her hands, and Richard could read it clearly. Bachelor of Medicine Diploma, Christopher Henderson Roberts. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here," she stammered, trying to stand up quickly. "Wait," said Richard, feeling a tightness in his chest. "That diploma, it's my son's." The young woman froze, looking at the gray-haired man wearing an impeccable black suit. Even in the light rain, she could see the deep pain in his eyes. "You're Christopher's father?" she asked, her voice choked. "Christopher was my only son," confirmed Richard, bending down to pick up the wet diploma. "But I don't understand. How do you have this? My name is Jessica Mitchell. I was Christopher's classmate in medical school. When he couldn't be present at the graduation ceremony, the administration gave me the diploma to deliver to his family. But I never knew how to find you." Richard felt his legs go weak. Christopher had studied medicine. That was impossible. His son studied business administration. That's what he knew. "You must be mistaken." Christopher studied business administration at the private university downtown. Jessica shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "No, sir. Christopher studied medicine at the state university. He changed his major 3 years ago. He always talked about how he wanted to tell his father, but he was afraid of the reaction." Richard's world crumbled at that moment. 3 years. His son had hidden such an important change from him for 3 whole years. "This can't be true," he murmured, more to himself than to Jessica. "Christopher talked about you a lot," continued the young woman, seeing the confusion on the businessman's face. "He said his father was his hero, but that he was afraid of disappointing you, that you had always dreamed he would take over the family business." Richard remembered the many conversations about the company's future. It was true that he had always planned for Christopher to take the helm of the business. It had been a dream nurtured since the boy was little. "But why medicine?" asked Richard, still trying to process the information. He wanted to help people. Christopher always said he grew up in a world of privilege and wanted to give back somehow. He volunteered at community clinics on weekends. Jessica watched the impact of her words on the man's face. Richard seemed to be meeting his own son for the first time. "Community clinics?" repeated Richard. "Yes. Christopher treated people in need in the South Bronx. He said that's where he felt most useful in life." Richard had never heard of these activities. Where was he on the weekends when his son said he was studying in a group? In fact, when was the last time he really talked to Christopher about his dreams and aspirations? The rain intensified, and Jessica began to shiver from the cold. Richard took off his jacket and placed it over the young woman's shoulders. "Come, let's talk somewhere more suitable," he said. Jessica hesitated for a moment but ended up accepting. The two walked in silence to Richard's car, a black Lexus parked near the cemetery entrance. During the drive to a nearby coffee shop, Richard watched Jessica in the rearview mirror. She was a simple young woman, dressed in modest but neat clothes. Her dark hair was tied in a low bun, and she held a small synthetic leather purse. "Tell me more about my son," Richard asked, as soon as they sat at a reserved table in the coffee shop. Jessica ordered only a hot tea, while Richard didn't even touch the coffee he had ordered. Christopher was very well liked by all his classmates, always willing to help. He would lend books, help those who struggled with the subjects. But he was a very private person about his family. "Private how?" Richard wanted to know. "Well, we all knew he came from a family with good financial standing, but he never talked about it. He never bragged or acted like he was better than others. In fact, he often seemed sad when the topic was family. Every word from Jessica was like a stab to Richard's heart. How had he become a stranger to his own son? And about his plans for the future? Did he mention anything? Jessica smiled for the first time since they had met, a melancholic expression. Christopher had a very specific dream. He wanted to open a community clinic in the area where he did volunteer work. He said those people needed access to quality medicine, not just basic first aid. Richard felt a lump in his throat. His son had planned to dedicate his life to helping the needy, while he had assumed Christopher would follow in his footsteps in the corporate world. Jessica, I need to ask you a difficult question. How did Christopher... Richard couldn't finish the sentence. The young woman lowered her eyes, nervously stirring her cup of tea. It was a traffic accident on his way back from a shift at the community clinic. It was early Sunday morning. Christopher always insisted on staying late to attend to anyone who arrived. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we are just starting out. Now continuing. Richard swallowed hard. His son had lost his life helping others, while he didn't even know about the volunteer work. You said Christopher wanted to talk about medicine but was afraid. Afraid of what, exactly? Jessica hesitated before answering, clearly uncomfortable. Christopher thought you would be disappointed. He always talked about how hard his father worked to build the company and how you hoped he would carry on the family legacy. And I truly did hope for that, admitted Richard. I never asked what he wanted for his own life. I always assumed our dreams were the same. Christopher admired you very much, said Jessica, trying to console him. He said he wanted to find a way to honor his father's work, but following his own path. That's why he thought about the community clinic. It would be like using the privileges he had to give back to society. Richard remained silent for several minutes, processing everything he had discovered. Jessica waited respectfully, sipping her tea. Jessica, you said Christopher died on his way back from a shift. Does that mean he was already a graduate? No, he was in his 5th year of the course. He was only 2 semesters away from graduation. The diploma I brought was granted posthumously by the university in recognition of his volunteer activities and his academic performance. Richard felt a mix of pride and sadness. His son had been recognized by the institution, but he had never known about any of it. May I ask you a favor? Richard said suddenly. Jessica looked at him curiously. I'd like you to show me where Christopher did his volunteer work. I need to know this part of his life. Are you sure? The area is very different from what you must be used to. I'm sure, stated Richard with determination. Jessica agreed to meet him the following Saturday at the subway station nearest to South Bronx. Richard spent the rest of the week thinking about the conversation and the revelations about Christopher. When he got home that night, he found his wife Elizabeth reading in the living room. She was an elegant 58-year-old woman with well-kept blonde hair and always dressed in designer clothes. Married for 35 years, they had built a comfortable life based on routine and social status. How was your visit to the cemetery? Asked Elizabeth without looking up from her book. Elizabeth, I need to tell you something I discovered today. The seriousness in Richard's tone made Elizabeth close the book and look at him attentively. Richard recounted the entire conversation with Jessica, from the medical degree to Christopher's plans for the future. Elizabeth listened in silence, her expression changing from surprise to sadness. Richard, are you saying our son had been studying medicine for 3 years and we didn't know? Asked Elizabeth, incredulous. That's right. And what's more, he did volunteer work in community clinics on weekends. Elizabeth stood up and began to walk around the room, processing the information. How is this possible? How did we not notice he had changed his major? Richard realized at that moment how much they had distanced themselves from Christopher. They had always assumed he was following the planned path, never questioning or taking an interest in the details of his academic life. Elizabeth, when was the last time we really talked to Christopher about his dreams, his plans? Elizabeth stopped walking and stared at him. They both knew the answer. Their conversations with their son had always revolved around superficialities, grades, money, social engagements. Richard, This means our son hid a fundamental part of his life from us for years. Why would he do that? According to Jessica, he was afraid of disappointing us. He knew we expected him to take over the company. Elizabeth sat down heavily on the sofa. The weight of the discovery was devastating for both of them. And now? What do we do with this information? Richard had already thought about it all afternoon. Tomorrow I'm going to see the place where Christopher worked as a volunteer. I need to understand who our son really was. Elizabeth looked at him worriedly. Richard, are you sure this is a good idea? Perhaps it's better to let the past rest. How can I let it rest? I discovered today that I didn't know my own son. Christopher wanted to open a community clinic to help people in need. Meanwhile, I kept pressuring him to take over a company he may not have even wanted. But Richard, you can't live on regrets. What happened, happened. Richard shook his head. It's not about regrets, Elizabeth. It's about honoring our son's memory the right way. If he wanted to help people, perhaps that's what we should do. What are you trying to say? I'm thinking of realizing the dream that Christopher couldn't. Opening the clinic he planned. Elizabeth stared at him as if he had gone mad. Richard, you know nothing about medicine or community work. How can you think of such a thing? I can learn. I can hire qualified people. I have the resources for it. And the company, your partners, your commitments? Richard hadn't thought about these practical aspects, but he wasn't intimidated. We'll see how things develop. First, I need to get to know this world that was important to Christopher better. Elizabeth sighed, recognizing the determination in her husband's eyes. When Richard decided on something, it was very difficult to dissuade him. On Saturday morning, Richard dressed more simply than usual, a pair of jeans and a cotton shirt, and headed to the meeting point with Jessica. The young woman was already waiting when he arrived, wearing a white nursing uniform. "Do you work here on Saturdays?" asked Richard. "Yes, I continue the volunteer work I did with Christopher. It's my way of honoring him." During the subway ride, Jessica explained to Richard about the reality of the area they would visit. "Mr. Henderson, the South Bronx is one of the most underserved areas in the city. The people here face hardships you may have never imagined. Lack of access to basic health services, entire families depending on a minimum wage, children without proper medical follow-up." Richard listened attentively, trying to imagine how his son had connected with that reality. Did Christopher feel good helping in these conditions? Christopher used to say it was where he felt most useful. He often said he was born with privileges, and that brought the responsibility to help those who didn't have the same opportunities. When they arrived at their destination, Richard was struck by the contrast. The streets were narrow, many houses were simple masonry constructions, and there were children playing in vacant lots. Jessica led him to a small, modest building that served as a community health post. "This is where Christopher used to see patients on weekends," she said. Richard entered the place and was introduced to Mrs. Dorothy, a 67-year-old woman who coordinated the volunteer work. She was a black woman, white hair tied in a bun with a warm smile that lit up her face, marked by years of life. "So you are Dr. Christopher's father," said Mrs. Dorothy, squeezing Richard's hands affectionately. "Doctor?" But he was still a student. Here everyone called him doctor. Respect doesn't come just from a diploma, it comes from the heart. And Christopher had a heart as big as the world. Mrs. Dorothy took Richard to see the facilities. There were 3 small rooms, basically equipped but organized with care. Christopher used to see patients here every Friday night and Saturday morning. He always arrived loaded with medicines he bought himself. He never let anyone leave without being seen, even if it meant staying late. Richard observed every detail, trying to visualize Christopher working in that environment. It was hard to reconcile the image of the son he knew with the dedicated young man these people described. "Mrs. Dorothy, how many people did Christopher see on a weekend?" "Well, Dr. Henderson, it could be about 50, 60 people sometimes. He didn't just consult, he explained about prevention, gave guidance on basic care. Many people here learned to take better care of their health because of him." Jessica showed Richard a wall with several photographs. In many of them, Christopher appeared smiling next to patients of all ages. "He made a point of photographing important moments," explained Jessica. "He said it made people feel valued." Richard picked up one of the photographs. In it, Christopher was holding a newborn baby with a genuine smile of happiness. It was an expression Richard hadn't seen on his son's face for years. "Was this baby born here?" asked Richard. "No, but Christopher followed the mother's entire pregnancy. When the child was born at the public hospital, he made sure to visit to make sure everything was all right," replied Mrs. Dorothy. Richard continued looking at the photographs, discovering a side of Christopher he had never known. In all the images, his son seemed genuinely happy and fulfilled. "Mrs. Dorothy, may I ask what Christopher's dream was for this place?" She smiled nostalgically. "Ah, Dr. Henderson, Christopher dreamed big. He wanted to turn this place into a real community clinic, with modern equipment, more consultation rooms, maybe even a small room for simple procedures." "Did he ever make concrete plans for it?" "Yes, he did. He even brought some papers with drawings and calculations. He said he was studying the feasibility, but that he would need a lot of money to make it happen." Richard felt his heart race. Christopher had made detailed plans for the clinic. "Mrs. Dorothy, do those papers still exist?" "I don't know, Doctor. After Christopher passed, Jessica took care of his things here." "Jessica, do you know about the clinic papers?" Jessica was thoughtful for a moment. "I think they're stored in the medicine room cabinet. Christopher always said they were important and asked me to keep them safe." "May I see them?" asked Richard eagerly. Jessica went to fetch the documents, while Richard talked more with Mrs. Dorothy. The lady told several stories about Christopher, each revealing aspects of his personality that Richard was unaware of. "Christopher had infinite patience with children," Mrs. Dorothy recounted. "He could get any child to stop crying and cooperate with the treatment. The mothers always asked to be seen by him. And with the elderly, he was even more caring. He would sit, talk, ask about their family. He treated every person as if they were part of his own family." Jessica returned with a blue folder full of documents. Richard opened it with trembling hands and found hand-drawn floor plans, lists of necessary equipment, supplier quotes, and even an implementation timeline. "Christopher did all this by himself?" asked Richard, impressed by the level of detail. "He spent hours researching, doing calculations, consulting professors at the university," said Jessica. "He was truly determined to make this dream a reality." Richard studied the documents for almost an hour. The project was ambitious but well thought out. Christopher had calculated costs, researched medical equipment suppliers, even planned a physical expansion of the space. "How much did Christopher estimate would be needed to implement this project?" asked Richard. Jessica flipped through the papers until she found the page with the total budget. According to his calculations, about $800,000 would be needed to implement the first phase. That would include renovation, basic equipment, and operation for 1 year. Richard did a quick calculation. It was a significant amount, but far from impossible for him. "And the second phase?" "The second phase would be the expansion to include 24-hour service and some more complex procedures. That would cost another $500,000 or so." Richard closed the folder and looked around the small health post. He could clearly visualize the improvements Christopher had planned. "Mrs. Dorothy, would the people in the community support a project like this?" "Dr. Richard, here everyone dreamed along with Christopher. When he talked about the clinic, everyone's eyes would light up. It would be a blessing for our area." Richard made a decision right then. "Mrs. Dorothy, Jessica, I would like to fulfill Christopher's dream. I want to implement the clinic project." Jessica looked at him surprised. "Mr. Richard, are you sure? It's a big and complex project." "I'm sure. It's the way I found to honor my son's memory and get to know him better at the same time." Mrs. Dorothy held Richard's hands, her eyes full of tears. "Dr. Richard, if this is true, you will fulfill the dream of many people here. Christopher would be very proud." Richard spent the rest of Saturday getting to know the community and talking with residents about their health needs. Each conversation reinforced his determination to move the project forward. On Sunday, Richard met with Elizabeth to tell her about his decision. Her reaction was exactly what he expected. "Richard, have you lost your mind? $800,000 on a community project. Elizabeth, it's the money we spend in a year on travel and luxuries, and it would be to fulfill our son's dream. Our son is deceased, Richard. Spending that amount won't bring him back. It's not about bringing him back. It's about getting to know him better and honoring his memory the right way. Elizabeth paced nervously around the room. And your partners? They're going to think you've lost your senses. I don't need their approval to use my own money. Richard, you're making an emotional decision. Take some time to think it over. Elizabeth, for the first time in years, I'm making a decision with my heart, and I feel it's the right thing to do. The discussion went on late into the night, without them reaching an agreement. Elizabeth couldn't understand her husband's determination, while Richard felt misunderstood. On Monday, Richard decided to talk to his two main partners, Charles Thompson and Robert Williams, to explain his plans. The meeting took place at the company office, a sophisticated space in New York City's business district. Richard, are you serious about investing nearly $1 million in a health clinic in the outskirts? Asked Charles, a 55-year-old man known for his practical business approach. It's not just a clinic, Charles. It's a full community clinic that can serve thousands of people a year. Robert, an older man of 68 and a partner for a longer time, shook his head in disapproval. Richard, we understand you've been going through a difficult time since Christopher's loss, but that shouldn't affect your business decisions. It's not affecting my business. It's a personal investment. Richard, everything you do reflects on our company, said Charles. Clients might question your ability to make rational decisions. Richard felt irritated by his partner's attitude. I'm investing in a valid, well-planned social project. I don't see how that could harm our reputation. It's just that you're not thinking about the implications, insisted Robert. What if the project fails? What if you get involved in problems with the community? Our company could be affected. You're exaggerating. Richard, we want to propose something, said Charles. Take a leave of absence for a few months. Rest, process your grief properly. When you come back, we can discuss more conventional ways to do charity. Richard realized his partners were questioning not just the project, but his mental sanity. I don't need a leave. I need your support for an important personal decision. Richard, would support mean agreeing to a folly? Asked Robert in a harsher tone. The meeting ended in a stalemate. Richard made it clear he would proceed with the project, regardless of his partner's opinion. During the following week, Richard began to set the project in motion. He hired an architect to adapt Christopher's designs to current regulations and contacted suppliers for updated quotes. Jessica became his main consultant on the project, helping him understand the community's specific needs and the medical aspects of the clinic. Mr. Henderson, you should know that some residents are suspicious of the project, said Jessica during one of their meetings. Suspicious? Why? Well, they don't know you. To them, you're just a wealthy businessman who suddenly appeared with promises. A lot of people here have been let down before. Richard understood the residents' concern. He truly was a stranger to that community. What do you think I should do to earn their trust? Perhaps you could come here more often, talk to people, understand their needs better. Show that your interest is genuine. Richard accepted the suggestion and began visiting the community regularly. Initially, the conversations were formal and superficial, but gradually people began to open up. It was during one of these visits that Richard met Mr. George, a 72-year-old man who was a kind of informal leader in the community. Dr. Richard, may I ask a question? Said Mr. George as they had coffee at a local bakery. Of course, Mr. George. Why do you want to spend so much money here? What is your real interest? The question was direct and honest. Richard decided to answer with the same sincerity. Mr. George, I discovered just a few weeks ago that my son, who passed away 2 months ago, did volunteer work here and dreamed of building a community clinic. I never knew this. I want to fulfill his dream because it's my way of getting to know who my son really was. Mr. George studied him for a few moments before responding. So you didn't know your own son? Apparently not. At least not the most important part of him. And you think building a clinic will solve that? Richard fell silent, thinking about the question. I don't know if it will solve it, Mr. George, but I know it's the right thing to do. My son wanted to help you all, and I want to honor that wish. Mr. George nodded slowly. Dr. Richard, I'll give you some advice. We need help here, that's true, but we don't need a savior. If you come here with a savior complex, people will reject the project. How should I act then? Come as a partner, listen to what we have to say. Include us in the decisions. Treat us as equals, not as poor souls who need charity. Mr. George's advice was fundamental for Richard. He revised his approach and began involving the community in planning the clinic. A meeting was organized at the local school to present the project and hear suggestions from the residents. Richard was nervous when he arrived and saw about 60 people gathered in the small auditorium. Everyone, I want to introduce you to Richard Henderson, father of Dr. Christopher, said Mrs. Dorothy, opening the meeting. Richard stood up and went to the front of the room. For the first time in years, he felt intimidated by an audience. Good evening, everyone. As Mrs. Dorothy said, I'm Christopher's father. I recently discovered the work my son did here and his dream of building a community clinic. Richard told his story, from the meeting with Jessica at the cemetery to the discovery of Christopher's detailed plans. The audience listened attentively without interruptions. I want to make this dream come true, but I need your help. I need to know what is most important to the community, what types of care are most needed, how we can make this work in the best way. After his presentation, several people asked questions and made suggestions. Richard noted everything carefully. Mrs. Mary, a 70-year-old woman, raised her hand. Dr. Richard, one thing we really lack here is care for the elderly. Our seniors have to travel very far for appointments. Noted, Mrs. Mary. What specialties would be most important? Cardiology, orthopedics, neurology, and it's also hard to get tests done. Others added suggestions about pediatrics, gynecology, and psychological care. By the end of the meeting, Richard realized that Christopher's project would need to be expanded to properly meet the community's needs. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Everyone, I want you to know that I will take all these suggestions into consideration. We need to adjust the project to meet as many needs as possible, said Richard, concluding his participation. On the way back home, Richard called Jessica. Jessica, after today's meeting, I realize we need to expand Christopher's original project. The community's needs are greater than he had calculated. You're right, but that means more investment. I'm prepared for that. I'm going to hire a public health consulting firm to help us properly scale the project. When he arrived home, Richard found Elizabeth waiting for him in the living room, visibly upset. Richard, I need to tell you something. This afternoon I got a call from David. He told me you're holding meetings in the outskirts and that the company's clients are starting to comment on your eccentricities. Richard felt irritation rising. What eccentricities? I'm carrying out a legitimate social project. Richard, you don't understand. People in our social circle don't understand these activities. They think you're going through an emotional crisis. And you, Elizabeth? What do you think? Elizabeth hesitated before answering. Richard, I'm worried about you. Ever since you discovered this story about Christopher, you've completely changed. You don't talk about anything else, you're not interested in social engagements, you don't want to travel anymore. Elizabeth, for the first time in years, I'm doing something that really matters. How can you not see that? Matters to whom, Richard? To you, or to these people you barely know? It matters to me, to the community, and to honor our son's memory. Elizabeth stood up and went to the window. Richard, sometimes I get the impression that you're more interested in this new life you've discovered than in the family you have here. Elizabeth's words hit Richard deeply. Was it possible he was taking refuge in the project to avoid facing other issues? Elizabeth, it's not a matter of choosing one life over another. It's about expanding our perspective. But you're not expanding, Richard. You're replacing. Our social life, our friends, our common interests, all of that is being left behind. Richard realized Elizabeth was right on some points. He really had distanced himself from his usual social circles and was investing all his energy in the community clinic project. Elizabeth, what would you like me to do? I'd like you to find a balance, to do your social project without completely abandoning our life. All right, I'll try to find that balance. In the following days, Richard made an effort to resume some social activities with Elizabeth, but he noticed his mind was always on the community clinic project. He had found a purpose that filled a void he didn't even know existed. The public health consulting firm presented a detailed report on the community's needs and the technical specifications required for a full clinic. The total investment would be 1.8 million reais. Richard did not hesitate to approve the budget, but his decision provoked a new crisis with the company's partners. David and Robert called an emergency meeting and presented an ultimatum. "Richard, we can no longer accept your irresponsible stance," said David. "You're compromising the company's image." "How so?" asked Richard. "Our clients are questioning your mental stability. Some have already expressed concern about maintaining contracts with us," explained Robert. "That's ridiculous. My personal life does not interfere with my professional ability." "Richard, you've missed 3 important meetings in the last 2 weeks. Your attention is clearly divided," said David. Richard acknowledged David was right about the meetings, but he didn't see it as something serious. "I can reorganize my schedule better." "It's not just the schedule, Richard. It's your attitude. You no longer show interest in the company's business," insisted Robert. "I am interested." "Richard, let's be direct," said David. "We want you to choose. Either dedicate yourself fully to the company, or we sell your stake and you are free for your social projects." Richard was shocked by the ultimatum. He didn't expect the situation to reach this point. "Are you forcing me to choose between the company I helped build and a legitimate social project?" "We are forcing you to make a responsible decision," said Robert. Richard asked for a week's deadline to give an answer. During this period, he spoke at length with Elizabeth about the implications of the decision. "Richard, if you sell your share of the company, our financial situation will change drastically," said Elizabeth. "Not drastically. We will continue to be financially comfortable, but with a more modest standard of living. And our retirement plans, our beach house, the trips we planned." Richard realized Elizabeth was worried about legitimate practical matters. "Elizabeth, they're just things. What really matters?" "Richard, these things are the result of 30 years of our work. How can you discard all that?" "I'm not discarding. I'm redirecting." Elizabeth began to cry. "Richard, I feel like I'm losing the man I married. You're becoming a person I don't recognize." Elizabeth's words touched Richard deeply. He began to question whether he was really acting in a balanced way. "Elizabeth, what would you like me to do?" "I would like you to find a way to honor Christopher without destroying everything we built together." Richard spent the whole night thinking. The next morning, he had an idea that could reconcile all the issues. He sought out Jessica and proposed a new approach to the project. "Jessica, what if instead of me fully funding the clinic, we created a campaign to raise funds? I would give a significant contribution, but I wouldn't be the only funder." Jessica found the idea interesting. "How would this campaign work?" "We could involve the university where Christopher studied, other companies, individuals interested in contributing. It would be a more collaborative project." "That would make the project more sustainable in the long term," agreed Jessica. Richard drafted a campaign proposal and presented it to his partners. The idea was for the company to make a donation of $500,000 as the main sponsor, while other contributions would complete the necessary amount. David and Robert found the proposal more reasonable, but still had reservations. "Richard, even so, you would have to be involved in managing the campaign. This would continue to divert your attention from the company's business," said David. "I can hire a social marketing firm to manage the campaign. My involvement would be mainly strategic." "And how long do you intend to dedicate yourself to this?" asked Robert. "Until the clinic is functioning properly. After that, I would create an administrative board to manage the project." The partners agreed to give the new approach a chance, but established that Richard would have to show concrete results both in the social project and in the company. The fundraising campaign was launched 3 months later, with an event at the university where Christopher had studied. Richard was moved to see hundreds of medical students attending to support the project. The university dean, Dr. Frederick Wilson, a 60-year-old man with vast experience in social projects in the health area, gave a touching speech about Christopher. Christopher Henderson was an example of what we hope for from our students. Academic excellence combined with a sense of social responsibility. This community clinic will be a permanent tribute to the values he represented. During the event, several people approached Richard to share memories of Christopher and express support for the project. He realized his son had touched many more lives than he had imagined. One of these people was Dr. Mark Reynolds, a professor of community medicine who had been Christopher's mentor. "Richard, your son was an exceptional student. He always questioned how to use his privileges to benefit those most in need," said Dr. Mark. "Professor, did Christopher ever talk to you about the community clinic project?" "Yes, he did. He even asked me to review his calculations and give technical suggestions. It was a very well thought out project for a student." "Do you think the project is viable?" "Not only viable, but necessary. The region Christopher chose truly lacks quality medical care." Dr. Mark offered to join the clinic's technical board, contributing his experience in community medicine. The campaign exceeded expectations. In 6 months, $2.2 million was raised, allowing for an even more complete implementation than originally planned. Pharmaceutical companies donated equipment, doctors volunteered to work, and the university created an internship program at the clinic for its students. During this period, Richard managed to maintain the balance Elizabeth had asked for. He remained active in the company, but dedicated his weekends and some afternoons to the clinic project. Construction began 1 year after Richard met Jessica at the cemetery. On the day the cornerstone was laid, both Richard and Elizabeth were present, along with hundreds of community residents. Mrs. Dorothy, now 68, was invited to symbolically place the cornerstone. "Dr. Christopher, wherever you are, know that your dream is becoming a reality," she said, moved. Richard felt a mixture of sadness and joy. Christopher wasn't there to see his project happen, but somehow Richard felt he was getting closer to the son he had never properly known in life. During the 8 months of construction, Richard visited the site regularly, following each stage of progress. He had become a familiar figure in the community, no longer seen as the rich businessman, but as Dr. Christopher's father. Mr. George, who had become a good friend of Richard, accompanied him on visits and offered advice on how to better meet the community's needs. "Dr. Richard, the clinic will be a blessing for our people. But what impresses me most is seeing how you've changed during this time," said Mr. George during one of their conversations. "How so, Mr. George?" "When you first came here, you seemed like a lost man carrying a very heavy burden. Now I see a man who has found a purpose." Richard reflected on Mr. George's words. It was true he felt more fulfilled and with a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. "Mr. George, can I confess something? Sometimes I feel I got to know my son better after he passed away than when he was alive." "Dr. Richard, perhaps we can only truly know someone when we stop trying to mold that person to our expectations." Mr. George's observation was profound. Richard realized that for years he had tried to mold Christopher according to his own aspirations, without ever really listening to his son's dreams. 2 weeks before the clinic's inauguration, Richard faced a new crisis. Elizabeth was diagnosed with a heart condition requiring surgery. "Richard, I'm scared," Elizabeth confessed on the eve of the surgery. "Everything will be all right, Elizabeth. You're in the best hospital in the city, with the best doctors. It's not just the surgery I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that if something happens to me, you'll drift even further from the life we had together." Richard held Elizabeth's hands tenderly. "Elizabeth, these months have taught me that I don't have to choose between honoring Christopher and loving you. I can do both. Promise me that, no matter what happens, you won't forget to live your own life." "I promise." Elizabeth's surgery was successful, but her recovery coincided with the week of the clinic's opening. Richard divided his time between caring for his wife and finalizing preparations for the event. Elizabeth, still recovering, insisted on accompanying Richard to the opening. "Richard, I want to be present for the most important moment of our son's life, even if it's posthumously," she said. The opening day was marked by a light rain, exactly like the day Richard met Jessica at the cemetery a year before. The clinic was ready. 5 consultation rooms, a procedure room, a comfortable waiting area, a basic pharmacy, and even a small play area for children. Richard gave an emotional speech to the hundreds of people present. "A year ago, I was a father who thought he knew his son. Today I know Christopher was so much more than I ever imagined. This clinic is not just a tribute to him, but a commitment to the values he represented." Jessica, now graduated and appointed the clinic's medical coordinator, also spoke. "Christopher always said that medicine isn't just about curing diseases, but about caring for people. This clinic is the realization of that vision." The first patient seen was Mrs. Mary, the 70-year-old woman who had suggested geriatric care during the first community meeting. "Dr. Richard, I never imagined the day would come when I'd have a cardiologist right here in the neighborhood," she said, moved after her appointment. At the end of the day, Richard and Elizabeth walked through the empty clinic, observing every detail. "Richard, I'm proud of what you've done here," said Elizabeth. "And I think Christopher would be too." "Elizabeth, thank you for supporting me, even when you thought I was losing my way." "Richard, I learned a lot in this process too. I learned that sometimes you have to take risks to find true meaning in life." 6 months after the opening, the clinic had already served over 3,000 people. Richard had established a routine of visiting the place every Friday, talking with patients and observing the medical team's work. During one of these visits, Jessica sought Richard for a private conversation. "Mr. Richard, I need to tell you something I recently discovered." "What is it, Jessica?" "Do you remember the documents Christopher left about the clinic?" "Of course." "Well, I found a folder I hadn't seen before. In it is a letter Christopher wrote to you." Richard felt his heart race. "A letter? Where was it?" "It was inside a medical book he always carried. I think he was waiting for the right courage to deliver it." Jessica handed over an envelope with Dad written in Christopher's handwriting. Richard opened it with trembling hands. "Dad, if you're reading this letter, it's because I've finally found the courage to tell you about my switch to medicine and my plans for the community clinic. I know you always dreamed I would take over the company, and for a long time I tried to want that too. But I discovered my passion is caring for people who need help. I don't want you to think I'm rejecting everything you built. On the contrary, I want to use the privileges you gave me to give back to society. The clinic would be my way of honoring your work, but following my own path. I've always admired your determination and ability to make dreams come true. I hope you can admire my dream too. With love and admiration, Christopher." Richard read the letter several times, tears streaming down his face. Jessica waited respectfully as he processed his son's words. "Jessica, was Christopher ready to tell me about medicine when—" "Yes. He had scheduled a lunch with you for the week after the accident. He was very nervous but determined." Richard realized that he and Christopher were closer than he had imagined. His son truly admired him and just wanted to follow a different path. "Jessica, do you think Christopher would be satisfied with what we've done here?" "I'm sure he would, Mr. Richard. In fact, I think he'd be surprised by the scale the project has taken. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing." That night, Richard showed the letter to Elizabeth. She was also moved reading Christopher's words. "Richard, what a beautiful letter. Christopher really admired you. Elizabeth, do you know what strikes me most about this letter? He wasn't rejecting our values. He was trying to apply them in a different way." "That's true. He wanted to use the privileges he had to help others." Richard framed the letter and placed it in his office, next to a photo of the community clinic in operation. 2 years after its inauguration, the clinic had become a benchmark in community care. Universities sent students for internships, other municipalities sought to replicate the model, and international organizations expressed interest in studying the project. Richard had been invited to speak about corporate social responsibility at several conferences. During these presentations, he always told the story of how discovering his son's dreams changed his perspective on success and fulfillment. At one such lecture, at the National Association of Manufacturers, Richard met other business owners interested in similar social projects. "Richard, your story is inspiring," said Jennifer Brooks, a textile industry entrepreneur. I'm thinking of creating something similar in the region where my company operates. Jennifer, I'd be happy to share our experience. The important thing is to always involve the community in the planning. Richard, may I ask a personal question? Said another business owner present, Joseph Charles Anderson. How do you balance the time dedicated to the social project with your businesses? Joseph Charles, I found that dedicating time to something that truly matters made me more efficient in all other activities. It's as if I found more energy. And your family? How did you handle the changes? My wife initially resisted, but later understood that I became a better and more fulfilled person. Our relationship even improved. After the lecture, Richard was approached by a journalist from Business Weekly magazine interested in writing a piece about his experience. Mr. Richard, what has changed most in your life since you discovered your son's project? Asked the journalist. I discovered that success is not just about accumulating wealth, but using that wealth to create positive impact, and that truly knowing a person, even our own children, requires listening without judgment. The article was published under the title, "The Businessman Who Discovered His Son Through a Dream," and generated hundreds of comments from readers who identified with the story. One such reader was Patricia Davis, a 65-year-old retired doctor, who lost a son under similar circumstances. Mr. Richard, I read your story in the magazine and identified deeply. I also discovered things about my son that I didn't know when he was alive. I'd like to see the clinic and perhaps contribute in some way. Richard replied to Patricia's email, and they arranged a meeting. She visited the clinic on a Friday and was impressed with its operation. Richard, this place is exactly what my son Daniel dreamed of creating. He also wanted to be a doctor and work with underprivileged communities, said Patricia. Patricia, what kind of medicine did your son want to practice? Pediatrics. Daniel loved children and dreamed of having a clinic where he could treat them for free. Richard had an idea. Patricia, what if we expanded the clinic to include a pediatric wing especially dedicated to your son's memory? Patricia was moved by the proposal. That would be wonderful, Richard. How can I contribute? You could help us with your medical experience and perhaps mobilize other pediatric professionals interested in contributing. The partnership with Patricia resulted in the creation of the pediatric wing Daniel Davis, inaugurated 1 year later with state-of-the-art equipment for childcare. The project grew beyond what Richard had ever imagined. What began as a way to honor Christopher had become a community health complex serving all age groups. Elizabeth, fully recovered from her surgery, had become actively involved in the project, coordinating a group of volunteers who organized recreational activities for the young patients. Richard, who would have thought I'd become a volunteer, said Elizabeth, laughing, while organizing a birthday party for children treated at the clinic. Elizabeth, you always had a calling to care for people. You just hadn't found the right opportunity. That's true. And you know what surprises me most? How fulfilled I feel doing this. The clinic had created a network of impact that extended far beyond the original community. Families served sent thank you letters, former patients returned as volunteers, and local youth were inspired to pursue medicine. One such young man was Michael Mitchell, a 19-year-old who had been treated at the clinic at age 15 for a respiratory problem. Dr. Richard, I want to thank you because it was here that I discovered my calling for medicine, said Michael, who had just been accepted into college. Michael, I'm very happy to hear that. What do you plan to do after graduation? I want to come back here. This clinic saved me when I was a teenager, and now I want to help save others. Stories like Michael's repeated regularly, showing that the project had created a virtuous cycle of social transformation. 3 years after the inauguration, Richard decided to formalize his dedication to the social project. He reduced his involvement in the original company, keeping only an advisory position, and created the Christopher Henderson Institute to manage not only the clinic, but other social projects in the health area. Richard, are you sure about this decision? Asked Charles, his former partner, during a conversation about the transition. Charles, in the last 3 years I've discovered a professional fulfillment I never experienced before. I can no longer imagine my life without this purpose. And financially, how will you support yourselves? Elizabeth and I have adjusted our standard of living. We live more simply but infinitely more meaningfully. Charles shook his head, still not fully understanding Richard's transformation. Richard, I won't say I understand your choices, but I recognize the results. You seem like a happier and more fulfilled person. The Christopher Henderson Institute soon attracted the attention of international organizations interested in replicating the model in other Latin American countries. Richard was invited to present the project at the Pan American Health Organization in Washington. It's remarkable how a project born from personal pain has transformed into a community health model, said Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the organization's representative. Doctor, Michael, I believe pain, when properly channeled, can become a force to create positive solutions, replied Richard. During the trip to Washington, Richard carried with him Christopher's letter and a photo of the functioning community clinic. He had made a habit of carrying them whenever he traveled for work. Christopher, your dream not only came true, but inspired similar dreams in many other people, murmured Richard, looking at the clinic's photo from the airplane. When he returned to the United States, Richard was greeted with a surprise. The community had organized a celebration in his honor for the clinic's 4th anniversary. Dr. Richard, you gave us much more than a clinic. You gave us hope and dignity, said Mrs. Dorothy, now 72, during the opening speech of the celebration. Richard was moved to see hundreds of people present, many of them former patients of the clinic who had recovered from health problems thanks to the care they received. Mr. George, now 76, approached Richard during the party. Dr. Richard, can I say something? When you first arrived here, I was sure you were just another rich man wanting to clear his conscience. Today, I know I found a true friend. Mr. George, you and this community have taught me more about life and purpose than I learned in 60 years of existence. Dr. Richard, what is the next dream? Richard smiled, thinking about the question. Mr. George, the next dream is to see this model spread throughout the United States, that every community in need has access to quality medical care. And do you think that's possible? Christopher believed it was possible. And if my son dreamed of it, I will do everything I can to make that dream come true. During the following months, Richard worked on developing an implementation manual for the clinic model, documenting all the necessary steps to replicate the project in other communities. Jessica, now 28 and established as one of the country's leading references in community medicine, collaborated on the manual's development. Mr. Richard, I think it's important to include in the manual the importance of community involvement from the initial planning, suggested Jessica. I completely agree. And we should also emphasize that it's not just a matter of financial resources, but of genuine commitment to people. The manual was launched at an event at the university where Christopher had studied, attended by the dean and representatives from various health organizations. This manual represents the democratization of access to quality health care, said Dean Dr. Frederick Wilson. It is a legacy that certainly honors the memory of Christopher Henderson. During the launch, Richard met Dr. Paul Henry Cooper, the health secretary of a municipality in New York State, interested in implementing the model. Richard, our municipality has characteristics very similar to the community where you implemented the clinic. Do you believe we could adapt the model to our reality? Dr. Paul, I will be happy to help. The important thing is always to adapt the project to the specific needs of each community. The partnership with the New York municipality resulted in the second community clinic, Christopher Henderson, inaugurated 2 years later with combined resources from the local city hall, regional business leaders, and the Christopher Henderson Institute. Elizabeth accompanied Richard on the trip for the inauguration of the second clinic. Richard, look how far our son's dream has reached, she said, emotional during the ceremony. Elizabeth, sometimes I think Christopher knew his dream would grow beyond what he himself imagined. Perhaps he had that intuition. After all, people with big hearts usually dream big too. At the end of the 5th year of the first community clinic, Richard received an unexpected call from a documentary producer at Netflix, interested in telling the project's story. Mr. Henderson, we believe your story can inspire many people around the world. Would you like to participate in a documentary about personal transformation through social purpose. Richard agreed to participate in the documentary, seeing it as an opportunity to further broaden the reach of Christopher's message. During the filming, Richard visited Christopher's grave for the first time since he had met Jessica at the cemetery 5 years earlier. "Christopher, I came here to thank you. Your dream not only came true, but it taught me to dream too," said Richard, placing a bouquet of flowers on the grave. The camera captured the moment Richard placed on the headstone a photo of the first community clinic in operation and a copy of the letter Christopher had written, but never had the chance to deliver. "Son, I now know you always admired me, even when I couldn't hear you properly. And I want you to know that I admire you now too, not just as a father, but as a person inspired by your values." The documentary was released under the title The Dream That Didn't Die, and became one of the most watched on the platform in the United States, generating thousands of comments from people inspired by the story. One of these comments came from Ann Paula Roberts, a businesswoman from Philadelphia who had lost a daughter under similar circumstances. "Richard, your story touched me deeply. I also discovered dreams of my daughter that I was unaware of. I would like to create something similar in Pennsylvania." Richard contacted Ann Paula and helped her develop the third community clinic, Christopher Henderson, this time adapted to the specific needs of the northeastern region. Elizabeth, now 63, had become an active partner to Richard in all projects. "Richard, do you realize that in the last 5 years we have lived more intensely than in the previous 30? She said during a conversation at home. "Elizabeth, it's incredible how finding a true purpose transforms everything. Our relationship, our perspective on life, our energy. And you know what else amazes me? How Christopher, even though he is no longer physically here, continues to bring people together and create positive transformations." Richard agreed, reflecting on how Christopher's legacy had grown exponentially. "Elizabeth, sometimes I think our son planned all of this, as if he knew his dream would need other people to be fully realized." On the 6th anniversary of the first community clinic, Richard took stock of the results. 3 clinics in operation, more than 50,000 consultations provided, hundreds of healthcare professionals involved voluntarily, dozens of young people inspired to pursue medicine, and a model being discussed for replication in other countries. During the celebration, Jessica, now married and pregnant with her first child, made a special announcement. "I would like to announce that my son, who will be born in a few months, will be named Leonardo, in honor of the young man who inspired all of this." Richard was deeply moved by the tribute. "Jessica, there is no greater tribute you could give. Christopher would be honored. Mr. Henderson, I hope my son grows up with the same values that Christopher represented: compassion, dedication, and commitment to those most in need." Mrs. Dorothy, now 73 but still active at the clinic, approached Richard. "Dr. Henderson, do you know that today marks exactly 6 years since that rainy afternoon when you met Jessica at the cemetery?" Richard had lost track of the days, but Mrs. Dorothy was right. "Mrs. Dorothy, it feels like yesterday, and at the same time it feels like a whole lifetime ago." "It's because it was a whole lifetime, Dr. Richard. You lived one life before that day and began living a completely different one after. And you? How do you assess these 6 years? These were the most rewarding years of my life, seeing our community transformed, seeing young people inspired to study medicine, seeing families being properly cared for. It's more than I dreamed of in 73 years of life." Richard looked around the celebration, hundreds of people talking, children playing, former patients sharing recovery stories, young medical students networking with experienced professionals. "Mrs. Dorothy, I think Christopher would be surprised to see how far his initial dream has come. Dr. Richard, I think our Christopher planned all of this. People with big hearts always dream beyond what they can achieve alone. They plant seeds that others will water." Mrs. Dorothy's words made Richard reflect on the nature of true legacies. Christopher had planted a seed, but it was other people who watered it, cultivated it, and allowed it to bloom. That night, Richard and Elizabeth walked through the empty community clinic, as they had done on the opening day 6 years before. "Richard, do you regret anything from all these years?" asked Elizabeth. "I only regret not having known Christopher better when he was alive. But I don't regret any decision we've made since then," not even having completely changed our lives, especially for having changed our lives. Elizabeth, we are better people today than we were 6 years ago. That's true, and our relationship is also stronger, Richard agreed. Facing the challenges of the project together had strengthened their marriage in an unexpected way. Elizabeth, can I tell you a secret? Of course. Sometimes I feel like Christopher is still with us, guiding our decisions, inspiring our actions. Richard, I think he really is, not in a mystical sense, but in the sense that we've incorporated his values into our way of living. Richard considered Elizabeth's words. It was true that they had internalized the values Christopher represented: compassion, social responsibility, dedication to others. Elizabeth, what do you think our next step should be? I think we should continue expanding the project, but also start preparing other people to carry it on when we are no longer here. Elizabeth's suggestion made sense. Richard had turned 68 and Elizabeth 64. Although both were in excellent health and had the energy to continue, it was important to ensure the project's long-term sustainability. In the following months, Richard began structuring an administrative board for the Christopher Henderson Institute with representatives from the community, healthcare professionals, business people, and academics. Jessica was appointed executive director of the institute, ensuring medical and administrative continuity. Dr. Mark Reynolds, Christopher's former professor, assumed the technical directorship. Mrs. Dorothy was appointed the community's official representative. I want to ensure this project continues to grow, even when Elizabeth and I are no longer active, explained Richard during the first meeting of the new board. Richard, you've created something bigger than a person or a family. You've created a movement, said Dr. Mark. The movement had truly taken on a life of its own. Medical students from various American universities created study groups on community medicine, inspired by the Christopher Henderson model. Business people from different sectors began developing social projects in their regions. Municipal governments sought the Institute for guidance on public health policies. Richard was invited to speak at the National Health Conference in Washington, D.C. about the role of private initiative in community medical care. The experience of the Christopher Henderson Institute shows that well-structured partnerships between private initiative, the community, and public authorities can generate exceptional results, said Richard in his presentation. During the conference, Richard met the Secretary of Health, Dr. Richard Foster, who expressed interest in studying the replication of the model on a national scale. Richard, what you've created could be adapted for the national health system, asked the Secretary. Dr. Foster, I believe so, but it would be essential to maintain the direct involvement of the community and the flexibility for local adaptations. I'm thinking of creating a pilot program in 5 American municipalities, using your model as a basis. Richard was excited by the possibility of expanding the project's reach even further. Dr. Foster, the Institute would be available to collaborate with all our accumulated experience. The pilot program was launched 6 months later, with the Christopher Henderson Institute providing technical and methodological consultancy to 5 municipalities in different regions of the country. Elizabeth accompanied Richard on several trips to monitor the implementation of the pilot projects. Richard, imagine if Christopher could see where his initial dream has reached, she said, during a visit to the community clinic implemented in West Virginia. Elizabeth, I think he knew his dream would grow. Visionary people always plant seeds larger than they can cultivate alone. The success of the pilot projects led the Department of Health to include the Christopher Henderson model among the official guidelines for community medical care in the United States. Richard was invited to sign the decree that formalized the national policy alongside the President. Mr. Henderson, it's an honor to have a citizen like you contributing to our country's public policies, said the President during the ceremony. Mr. President, the honor is mine, and I'm sure my son Christopher would be proud to see his dream become national policy. The ceremony was broadcast nationally, and Richard took the opportunity to honor all the people who had contributed to the project's growth. I want to dedicate this moment to the memory of Christopher Henderson, but also to Jessica Mitchell, Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. George, Dr. Mark Reynolds, my wife Elizabeth, and all the hundreds of people who transformed an individual dream into a collective reality. When they returned to New York City, Richard and Elizabeth were welcomed in the community with a surprise party organized by the residents. "Dr. Richard, you left here as a representative of our community and returned as a representative of the entire United States," said Mr. George, now 79 years old. "Mr. George, I have always been a representative of this community. The difference is that now our community has expanded to the entire country." During the party, Richard received a special tribute. The residents had created a mural with photos of all the people served at the clinic over its 7 years of operation. "That's over 20,000 faces," explained Mrs. Dorothy. "Each one represents a life touched by Christopher's dream." Richard walked slowly along the mural, observing faces of all ages. Children who had been treated as babies and were now teenagers, elderly people who had regained their quality of life, young people who were inspired to study medicine. "Christopher, your dream saved many more lives than you could have saved alone," murmured Richard, gently touching one of the photos. Jessica, now with her 2-year-old son Christopher in her arms, approached Richard. "Mr. Richard, I want you to meet someone special," she said, introducing the child. Little Christopher smiled at Richard, who was moved to see his son's name perpetuated in a new generation. "Hi, Christopher," said Richard, affectionately stroking the child's head. "You will grow up hearing stories about Christopher, who inspired all of this. Mr. Henderson, I intend to tell him about his grandfather Christopher from a young age, about how one person can change the world through compassion and dedication," said Jessica. Richard was moved to think that his son's story would be passed down to future generations through Jessica's family. "Jessica, Christopher wasn't just my son. He became a son to this entire community, to everyone touched by his values." During the following months, Richard began writing a book telling the whole journey, from the meeting with Jessica at the cemetery to the national implementation of the model. "Elizabeth, I want to document everything so other people can be inspired and perhaps transform their own losses into positive projects," explained Richard. "I think it's a wonderful idea. How many people could benefit from guidance on how to channel pain into purpose?" The book, The Dream That Didn't Die, How the Posthumous Discovery of a Son's Values Transformed Thousands of Lives, was launched on the 8th anniversary of the first community clinic. The launch took place at the clinic itself, with the presence of all the people who had been fundamental in the journey: Jessica and her family, Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. George, Dr. Mark, the members of the Institute's board, and hundreds of community residents. "This book doesn't just tell my story," said Richard during the launch. "It tells the story of all of you who turned a dream into reality." The book became a national bestseller and was translated into several languages. Richard donated all royalties to the Christopher Henderson Institute, ensuring resources for the continuous expansion of the projects. During an interview for a television program about the book, Richard was asked what the greatest lesson of the entire journey had been. "The greatest lesson was discovering that it's never too late to truly know the people we love, and that the most powerful dreams are those that manage to survive and grow even after the dreamer is gone." "And what would you say to parents who might be living situations similar to yours before this transformation?" "I would tell them to listen to their children without trying to mold them according to their own expectations, to ask about their dreams instead of just talking about their own dreams for them." The interview generated thousands of comments from viewers who identified with the story and decided to re-evaluate their family relationships. On the 9th anniversary of the clinic, Richard made a special announcement. He and Elizabeth were moving permanently to the community. "We want to spend our last active years here, among the people who have become our true family," said Richard. "And we want to help train the next generation of community leaders," Elizabeth added. The decision surprised many friends from the couple's original social circle, but was received with joy by the community. Mr. George, now 80 years old, helped Richard and Elizabeth choose a simple house just 2 blocks from the clinic. "Dr. Henderson, imagine that 9 years ago you arrived here as a visitor, and now you're going to live here as a neighbor," said Mr. George. "Mr. George, I've actually always been from here. It just took me 9 years to realize it." The move marked the beginning of a new phase in the couple's life. Richard began dedicating himself fully to the Institute, while Elizabeth developed a literacy program for adults in the community. "Richard, do you know what the most interesting part of our new life is?" said Elizabeth during a morning walk through the community. "What?" "We've finally discovered who we really are. Not the roles we played before, but our true personalities and purposes." Richard agreed. Life in the community had revealed aspects of their personalities they hadn't known. Elizabeth discovered a passion for education, while Richard developed community leadership skills he never knew he possessed. On the 10th anniversary of the clinic, the celebration lasted 3 days. Representatives from the 47 clinics that had been implemented using the Christopher Henderson model came from across the country to attend. 10 years ago, Christopher dreamed of a clinic. Today, we have 47 in operation and another 20 under construction, said Richard in his keynote speech. But what makes me proudest isn't the numbers. It's the stories. It's the young people inspired to study medicine. It's the families who regained their health. It's the communities that gained hope. During the celebration, Richard received a special surprise. Little Christopher, Jessica's son, now 5 years old, had prepared a drawing. "Uncle Richard, my mum told me about the Christopher who inspired the clinic. I made a drawing for him," said the boy, handing over a sheet of paper. The drawing showed a man in a white coat, surrounded by smiling children, with the caption, "Christopher, the doctor for the poor." Richard knelt beside the boy. "Christopher, this is the most beautiful drawing I've ever received. I will keep it forever. Uncle Richard, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor like Christopher too. I'm sure you will be a wonderful doctor." That night, Richard and Elizabeth walked through the clinic, now expanded to occupy an entire city block, with 15 treatment rooms, a clinical analysis laboratory, a full pharmacy, and even a small outpatient surgery room. "Richard, do you think Christopher imagined his dream would come to this?" asked Elizabeth. "I think Christopher knew he had planted a special seed. Maybe he didn't know exactly how it would grow, but he knew it would grow." They stopped before a plaque at the main entrance of the clinic. "Community Clinic Christopher Henderson, in memory of a young man who dreamed of healing the world." "Richard, you know what moves me most about this plaque?" "What?" "It's that it doesn't just speak of Christopher, it speaks of all of us who decided to keep dreaming along with him." Richard hugged Elizabeth, watching the nighttime activity of the clinic. Even late at night, there was always someone being treated in the emergency department, some family awaiting news, some volunteer doctor donating their time. "Elizabeth, thank you for embarking on this journey with me. I know it wasn't easy to completely change our lives." "Richard, thank you for showing me that it's possible to start over at 60, that it's possible to discover new purposes, even after a whole life." On the 11th anniversary of the clinic, Richard, now 73, announced his decision to gradually reduce his administrative activities, remaining only as an honorary advisor to the Institute. "It's time for the next generation to take the lead," said Richard. "Jessica, Doctor, Mark, and the young doctors trained by the Institute itself are ready to take the project to the next level." Jessica, now the executive director of the Christopher Henderson Institute, was moved by the announcement. "Mr. Richard, everything we've achieved is thanks to your dedication and vision. How will we continue without your daily leadership?" "Jessica, you won't continue without my leadership. You will continue with the leadership you've already developed. I merely planted the seed that Christopher had dreamed of. You made it grow and flourish." Richard spent the following months in a gradual transition process, transferring responsibilities and sharing all his accumulated experience with the new leadership. During this process, he dedicated time to visit each of the 63 clinics operating using the Christopher Henderson model in different states across the United States. "I want to personally see each adaptation of the model and thank each team," explained Richard to Elizabeth. The travels lasted 8 months and gave Richard a complete view of the national impact of the project. In each community clinic, he found unique stories of social transformation and lives saved. In Boston, he met Dr. Ann Beatrice, a 35-year-old doctor, who had been inspired by Christopher's story to leave a job at a private hospital and dedicate herself to community medicine. "Dr. Richard, Christopher's story changed my perspective on the purpose of medicine, said Dr. Ann Beatrice. In Chicago, he met a community that had replicated not only the clinic, but also a community education center inspired by the model. In Miami, he attended the graduation of 20 young people from the community itself, who had won study scholarships for medicine after learning about the local clinic. These young people represent the future of social medicine in the United States, said Richard during the ceremony. When the travels ended, Richard had a clear vision that the project had taken on a life of its own and no longer depended on his presence to continue growing. "Elizabeth, I am ready to officially retire from the Institute," said Richard upon returning from the last trip. "How do you feel about that?" "I feel I have fulfilled my mission. Christopher planted the dream. I helped it germinate, and now it is in capable hands to continue flourishing." On his 74th birthday, Richard received a national tribute. The United States Congress approved a motion of recognition for his contribution to American public health. During the ceremony in Washington, D.C., Richard gave his last official public speech. "I have received many honors over these years, but I want to make it clear that they belong to everyone who made the realization of my son Christopher's dream possible. They belong to Jessica, who believed in the project from day one. They belong to Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. George, Dr. Mark, and the thousands of volunteers who dedicated time and energy to care for others. But most of all, these honors belong to Christopher himself, a young man who dreamed of healing the world and planted a seed that continues to grow long after his physical departure." After the ceremony, Richard visited Christopher's grave in Washington, D.C. for the last time, accompanied by Elizabeth and Jessica. "Christopher, I came here to thank you one last time officially," said Richard, placing a wreath of flowers. "Your dream transformed not only thousands of lives, but also transformed your father into a better person. Now I know who you really were, a visionary young man who understood that true success in life is measured by the positive impact we have on others." Jessica placed a smaller wreath next to Richard's. "Christopher, my son carries your name and will grow up knowing your story. He will know that there are people capable of dreaming beyond their own lives." Elizabeth also placed flowers. "Christopher, thank you for teaching me through Richard that it is never too late to discover our true purpose in life." Richard, Elizabeth, and Jessica stood in silence for a few minutes, each with their own thoughts and memories. "Shall we go?" asked Richard finally. "Let's go," agreed Jessica. "But taking him with us, as always." In the years that followed, Richard dedicated himself to writing his complete memoirs and giving sporadic consultations for new social projects. Elizabeth developed a reading program for the community's elderly that became a national model. Little Christopher, Jessica's son, grew up hearing stories about his namesake, and by the age of 8 was already showing interest in becoming a doctor. "Uncle Richard, when I grow up, I want to take care of children like the original Christopher wanted to take care of adults," said the boy during a conversation. "What kind of children would you like to care for?" "The children who don't have a doctor near their home, just like Christopher wanted to care for the adults who didn't have a doctor." Richard smiled, seeing how Christopher's values were being naturally passed on to the next generation. On the 15th anniversary of the first community clinic, Richard, now 77, attended the celebration as a special guest. The event gathered over 2,000 people, including representatives from the 127 clinics operating across the United States using the Christopher Henderson model. Jessica, now 38 and nationally recognized as one of the country's leading specialists in community medicine, gave the keynote speech. 15 years ago, a young nursing student cried over the grave of a departed colleague holding his medical degree. Today, that same young woman leads an institute that has transformed the lives of more than 500,000 Americans. But this story isn't about me. It's about Christopher Henderson, a visionary young man who planted a seed of hope. It's about Richard and Elizabeth Henderson, who watered that seed with love and dedication. And it's about each one of you who helped that seed grow into a forest of solidarity. Richard listened to the speech, moved, reflecting on the incredible journey that had begun with that chance meeting in the cemetery. During the party, young Christopher, now 10, sought out Richard. Uncle Richard, can I ask you a question? Of course, Christopher. Do you think the original Christopher would be happy to see all this? Richard thought carefully about the question. Christopher, I think he would be surprised to see how far his dream has come, but mostly I think he would be happy to know his dream inspired so many other people to dream too. And you? Are you happy? I am very happy, Christopher. I'm happy because I discovered it's possible to honor someone we love, not just by mourning them, but by continuing the dreams that person had. The boy nodded seriously, as if committing the answer to memory. Uncle Richard, when I graduate from medical school, I want to work at the clinic that has my namesake's name. It would be an honor to have you on the team, Christopher. That night, Richard and Elizabeth walked through the community that had been their home for the past 6 years. The streets were well lit, the houses had been renovated, and several small businesses had sprung up to meet the needs of the medical complex's staff and visitors. Richard, look how this community has transformed, said Elizabeth. It's incredible, Elizabeth. The clinic didn't just bring health, but also economic and social development. They stopped in front of Mr. George's house, now 85, but still active and sharp. Mr. George is still awake, observed Elizabeth, seeing a light in the living room. They knocked on the door and the elderly man greeted them with a smile. Dr. Richard, Mrs. Elizabeth. What a wonderful surprise. Come in, come in. How are you feeling, Mr. George? Asked Richard. Dr. Richard, at 85 I can't complain about a thing. I have my health, I have friends, I have a clinic right around the corner, and most of all, I have the satisfaction of having seen a miracle happen in our community. A miracle? Asked Elizabeth. Mrs. Elizabeth, 15 years ago, our community was forgotten by the government. People died from lack of proper medical care. Today we have one of the best community health centers in the country. Richard reflected on Mr. George's words. What had begun as a way to deal with guilt and longing had turned into genuine social transformation. Mr. George, sometimes I wonder if Christopher ever imagined his dream could grow this big. Dr. Richard, I think he did. Special people always dream big even when they can't see exactly how their dreams will come true. And now? What is the next dream for our community? Mr. George smiled mysteriously. Dr. Richard, the next dream is to see our young people who graduated from medical school come back here as full-fledged doctors. It's to see the next generation continuing the work you all started. Mr. George's observation made Richard remember that several young people from the community had secured scholarships for medical school and would be graduating in the coming years. Mr. George, do you think they'll want to come back to work here? I'm certain, Dr. Richard. Those who grow up seeing dedicated doctors caring for their own community learn that medicine is much more than a profession. They learn it's a mission. On the drive back home, Richard talked with Elizabeth about the prospect of seeing young people from the community itself graduating as doctors and returning as professionals. Elizabeth, it would be incredible to see that cycle completed. The community that benefited from Christopher's dream now producing its own doctors. Richard, that would be the definitive proof that the project created a true and sustainable transformation. 2 years later, Richard had the joy of attending the graduation of the first class of doctors who originated from the community itself, 5 young people who had secured scholarships inspired by the Christopher Henderson Community Clinic. During the graduation ceremony, each of the 5 young people gave a speech thanking the Institute for the inspiration and promising to return to serve the community. Julia Mitchell, Mrs. Dorothy's daughter, was the class speaker. My mother worked as a cleaner her whole life to support me. When the Christopher Henderson Community Clinic opened, she started working there as a volunteer. It was there that I discovered my calling for medicine. Today I graduate as a doctor and return home with the knowledge needed to care for my community's health. This is possible thanks to the dream of a young man named Christopher Henderson and the dedication of people like Richard and Elizabeth Henderson who turned that dream into reality. Richard cried throughout Julia's speech. Seeing the concrete fruits of the educational transformation the clinic had provided was more moving than he had imagined. After graduation, the 5 young doctors were officially hired by the Christopher Henderson Institute to work at the community clinic. "Now we have doctors who know our reality intimately," said Jessica during the swearing-in ceremony for the new professionals. Richard, now 79 years old, attended the ceremony with great pride. "Christopher, today I saw something you would certainly be proud of. Young people from the community itself returning as trained doctors to care for their neighbors," said Richard during his brief speech. Little Christopher, Jessica's son and now 12 years old, watched the ceremony with great interest. "Mum, in a few years will it be me graduating from medical school?" he asked. "If you want to and dedicate yourself to your studies, yes," Jessica replied. "I do want to, and I want to work here like Julia and the others." Richard overheard the conversation and smiled, realizing how the cycle of inspiration continued to perpetuate itself. In the months that followed, Richard closely followed the work of the 5 young doctors and was impressed by their dedication and competence. Julia developed a cardiovascular disease prevention program specifically adapted to the community's dietary habits. Charles Thompson created a pediatric care protocol that became a reference for other clinics. Patricia Williams specialized in women's health and created support groups for pregnant teenagers. "These young people are innovating in ways I never imagined," Richard commented to Jessica. "It's natural, Mr. Richard. They know the community from the inside. They know exactly what the specific needs and difficulties are." Richard realized the transition phase was truly complete. The project had not only become sustainable, but was evolving and innovating through the new generation of leaders. On the community clinic's 18th anniversary, Richard made one last official visit to Christopher's grave. "Son, I came here to give you one final official report," said Richard, kneeling before the headstone. 18 years after discovering your dreams, I can say they've become much bigger than you ever imagined. We have 184 community clinics operating across the United States. Over 1 million people have been treated. Hundreds of young people have been inspired to study medicine. And most importantly, the community where you wanted to create the first clinic now has its own trained doctors. I think my mission is accomplished. From now on, your dream is in the hands of younger, more capable people, and I'm sure they will take that dream even further. Richard left one last wreath of flowers and a copy of the Christopher Henderson Institute's annual report, showing all the impact numbers and statistics. "Thank you, Christopher, for teaching me it's never too late to discover our true purpose in life." When he arrived home, Richard found Elizabeth preparing a special lunch. "How was your visit to Christopher?" she asked. "It was perfect. I felt I was able to make peace with the past for good and officially hand over the future to those who can take better care of it. And now? What will we do with the time we have left?" Richard smiled, embracing Elizabeth. "Now we'll enjoy our age wisely. We'll take care of ourselves, travel a bit, spend time with the people we love, and most of all we'll have a front-row seat watching Christopher's dream continue to grow." 5 years later, Richard, now 84, and Elizabeth, 79, still lived in the community and closely followed the clinic's operations. Richard had developed a slight mobility issue, but his mind remained sharp and active. Young Christopher, now 17 and about to take his college entrance exams for medicine, visited Richard regularly to talk about his plans. "Uncle Richard, I want you to know I plan to study preventive and community medicine," the young man said during one of his visits. "Why that specific choice, Christopher?" "Because I want to learn not just how to cure sick people, but mainly how to keep them from getting sick. I think that would be the natural evolution of the original Christopher's dream." Richard was impressed by the young man's maturity and vision. "Christopher, that's exactly the direction medicine is heading. Prevention is much more effective than treatment." "Uncle Richard, can I ask a personal question?" "Of course." "Do you regret anything from this whole journey?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "Christopher, I regret only not discovering my son's dreams when he was alive. But I don't regret any decision I made after discovering those dreams. And if you could do it all over again, would you do anything differently?" "I'd do everything the same, but I'd try to start sooner. I'd try to listen more and judge less when my son was still here." Young Christopher nodded thoughtfully. "Uncle Richard, thank you for turning a tragedy into hope for so many people." "Christopher, I didn't transform anything by myself. People like your mother, Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. George, Dr. Mark, and hundreds of others transformed it. I just planted a seed that other people made grow. On the clinic's 20th anniversary, Richard participated in the celebrations in a wheelchair, but with the same energy and enthusiasm as always. The celebration lasted an entire week and included representatives from all 247 community clinics operating under the Christopher Henderson model across the United States and 3 other Latin American countries. Jessica, now 43 and internationally recognized as a community medicine specialist, gave the keynote speech at the celebration. 20 years ago, a young nursing student met a businessman at the grave of his deceased son. Today, that young woman leads an international community health movement that has impacted more than 2 million lives. But the true measure of our success isn't in the numbers. It's in the fact that young people from the community itself are now graduating as doctors and returning to serve their neighbors. It's in the fact that other communities have replicated our model and adapted it to their specific realities. Richard listened to the speech, moved, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a chance meeting motivated by grief and transformed into a movement of hope. The young Christopher, now 22 and in his 4th year of medical school, approached Richard after the ceremony. "Uncle Richard, in 2 years I'll be graduating. Can I count on you to be there?" Richard, his eyes shining with emotion, held the young man's hands. "Christopher, I wouldn't miss your graduation for anything in the world. It will be the crowning of a cycle that began over 20 years ago. Uncle Richard, I want you to know I chose medicine because of the story of the original Christopher, but also because of your example. You taught me that a truly successful life is one that leaves the world better than it found it." Richard was deeply moved by the young man's words. "Christopher, thank you for giving me the chance to see the fruits of the seed your namesake planted continue to grow through a new generation." 2 years later, Richard, now 86, attended the graduation of Jessica's son, Christopher, held at the very university where the original Christopher had studied. During the ceremony, the dean paid a special tribute to the 2 Christophers who had inspired the entire transformation. "Today we celebrate not only the graduation of a young doctor, but the continuation of a legacy that has transformed thousands of lives over 2 decades, said the dean. Richard watched, moved, as the young Christopher received his diploma and took the medical oath. "I swear by my honor and the medical tradition that I will practice medicine with conscience and dignity, with the primary goal of human health, especially for those most in need of care," said the young Christopher during the oath. After the ceremony, Richard, Elizabeth, Jessica, and the whole family celebrated at a special party in the community. "Uncle Richard, I've achieved my dream of graduating from medical school. Now I'm going to achieve the dream of working at the clinic that bears my namesake's name," said the young Christopher. Richard smiled, feeling he had witnessed the perfect closing of an extraordinary cycle. "Christopher, I'm sure your namesake would be proud to see you continuing his legacy." In the following months, Richard closely followed the young Christopher's first steps as a doctor at the clinic. The young man demonstrated the same passion and dedication that had characterized his namesake 2 decades before. "Elizabeth, we've managed to see Christopher's dream perpetuating through a new generation," said Richard during one of his nightly reflections. "Richard, do you think the original Christopher imagined his dream would grow so much?" "I think he planted the seed knowing it was special, but without imagining exactly how it would grow. Visionary people always do that. They plant seeds larger than they can cultivate alone." On the 22nd anniversary of the clinic, Richard, now 87, attended his final public celebration. His health had deteriorated somewhat, but his mind remained lucid. During the celebration, he was honored with a special title, Guardian of the Christopher Henderson Dream. Richard Henderson dedicated more than 2 decades of his life to transforming his son's dream into reality. Today, that dream is a reality that transcends borders and continues to grow through new generations, said the city's mayor during the tribute. Richard gave his last public speech on this occasion. "When I discovered my son Christopher's dream 22 years ago, I was a businessman lost in my own grief. Today I am a fulfilled man who had the privilege of seeing how a dream can multiply infinitely when planted with love and cultivated with dedication. I was not the one who realized Christopher's dream. It was all of you. I merely had the honor of starting the process and the wisdom to hand over the growth to more capable people. Now at 87, I can say I have lived a full life. I saw the impossible become possible. I saw pain transform into hope, and most importantly, I saw that it is never too late to discover our true purpose in life. After the speech, Richard received a standing ovation from over 1,000 people present at the celebration. The young Christopher, now 24, and established as one of the most dedicated doctors at the community clinic, approached Richard. Uncle Richard, on behalf of all the generations that have been and will be inspired by the legacy of the original Christopher, thank you for transforming an individual dream into a collective reality. Richard hugged the young doctor, feeling his mission was truly complete. Christopher, now it's up to you all. Keep dreaming big and planting seeds that future generations can cultivate. 6 months later, Richard passed away peacefully at home at the age of 87, surrounded by Elizabeth and the extended family he had built in the community. His funeral was attended by over 5,000 people, including representatives from all the community clinics inspired by the Christopher Henderson model. Jessica gave the main speech during the ceremony. Richard Henderson was a father who discovered his son through a dream. He was a businessman who discovered purpose through love. He was a man who proved it is never too late to start over, and that the greatest legacies are those that continue growing after our time. The Christopher Henderson Community Clinic will continue to operate. The Institute will continue to expand. And the story of how a chance encounter in a cemetery turned into a movement of hope will continue to inspire people around the world. Richard was buried in the community's own cemetery, near the community clinic he had helped create. His tombstone bore the inscription, "Richard Henderson, a father who learned to dream with his son." Elizabeth, now a widow at 82, continued living in the community and overseeing the clinic's operation until her final days. The young Christopher gradually assumed leadership positions at the Institute, ensuring the continuity of the values that had inspired the entire transformation. 10 years after Richard's death, the Christopher Henderson model was operating in 500 community clinics around the world, had inspired public health policies in 15 countries, and had generated over 10,000 direct jobs in the field of community health. The young Christopher, now Dr. Christopher Mitchell at 34, had become one of the world's leading experts in community preventive medicine. During an international conference on public health, Dr. Christopher told the complete story of the movement that had inspired his career. It all began with a young doctor who dreamed of healing the world. It continued with a father who discovered those dreams through the pain of loss. And it persists through all of us who choose to keep dreaming and planting seeds for future generations, said Dr. Christopher in his presentation. The audience of over 1,000 healthcare professionals from around the world gave a standing ovation at the end of the presentation. After the conference, Dr. Christopher visited the graves of the two Christophers who had inspired his life, the original who had planted the initial dream, and Richard who had watered that dream until it became reality. Original Christopher, Christopher Richard, thank you for teaching me that medicine is much more than a profession. It is a mission of love that multiplies infinitely when planted with purpose and cultivated with dedication, said Dr. Christopher, placing flowers on both graves. The sun was setting over the cemetery, creating a golden light that illuminated the headstones and the surrounding trees. Dr. Christopher remained silent for several minutes, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had connected 3 generations through a common dream. When he rose to leave, Dr. Christopher carried with him the responsibility and the privilege of continuing to perpetuate a legacy that had transformed millions of lives and would continue to transform many future generations. The story of the community clinic, Christopher Henderson, had become legend, but not a legend of the past. It was a living legend, one that continued to be written each day through every life saved, every young person inspired, every community transformed, and somewhere, in the dimension where dreams that have become reality reside, 2 men named Christopher smiled, knowing they had planted special seeds that would continue to germinate and flourish long beyond their time on Earth. End of story. What an emotional story. The journey of Richard and his posthumous discovery about Christopher's true dreams teaches us that it is never too late to change and find our true purpose. Now tell us, what did you think of this transformation? Which moment in the story moved you the most? Leave your sincere comment about how this story made you reflect on purpose and legacy. Your opinion is very important to us.